And since the beginning of the Russian assault on Ukraine, there have been threats and counter-threats exchanged between Russia and the Western allies. And now the Russian president has alluded to Russia's nuclear arsenal while effectively warning the West to back off. In a meeting with the Russian Security Council, the Russian president has ordered his defense chiefs to put the country's nuclear deterrence forces on high alert. The president said that nuclear deterrence forces have been put on alert in a special regime of combat duty. Here's what he said.
Уважаемые коллеги, вы видите, что западные страны предпринимают не только недружественные действия в отношении нашей страны в экономической сфере, я имею в виду нелегитимные санкции, о которых все хорошо знают, но высшие должностные лица ведущих стран НАТО допускают и агрессивные высказывания в адрес нашей страны. Поэтому приказываю министру обороны и начальнику генерального штаба.
Vladimir Putin has accused the West of taking unfriendly steps against his country. International tensions are already mounting over the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the Russian president's order could cause further alarm. Russia's ally Belarus also threatening to deploy nuclear weapons if Poland or Lithuania do so. Responding to Russia's move of putting its nuclear deterrence forces on high alert, the White House has said that the Russian president is manufacturing threats that do not exist in order to justify further aggression. The White House also said that the recent threats are a pattern that America has seen from Vladimir Putin through the course of this conflict. The NATO chief also called the Russian president's decision dangerous and irresponsible. Moscow has the world's second largest arsenal of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles, which form the backbone of Russia's deterrence forces. This is the second time that the Russian president resorted to such posturing, warning the Western allies. In a statement at the onset of the invasion, Putin said that anyone who tried to hinder Moscow would encounter historic consequences. Fears of a standoff between nuclear powers is a large part of the reason the US and its NATO allies have so far been so adamant that they will not be sending troops to Ukraine. Dr. Curry and Amanda still with us. Dr. Curry, first to you about how and to what extent Russia would have been prepared to deal with the West sanctions, given the threats of these sanctions being imposed coming in for days and weeks now, and to what extent Russia would be prepared at this point?
I don't think Russia expected this to happen. It's always been used as a threat, but as was mentioned in one of the earlier reports, Putin had said in 2014 that cutting them out of the banking system would be seen as an act of war. And this is one of those situations where, although we didn't expect Vladimir Putin to invade Ukraine, he also did most likely not expect the United States and their allies and partners to push for kicking Russia out of the SWIFT banking system. This is going to affect a lot of things. This is even affecting people that are working in positions like you and I. Journalists right now in Moscow are talking about how they're being asked to pay their hotel bills in advance because store owners, hotel owners are afraid that they won't be able to accept international credit cards. There's been a run on banks. The ruble is dropping in the exchange rates. This is affecting everyone. And I don't think that any country can become prepared for being kicked out of the SWIFT system because the world is now so interconnected. Being pushed to the outside of that is going to affect all walks of life, from business to everyday life, and the amount of people in Russia that receive funds from family members working outside of Russia. They're going to be affected probably most.
Amanda, help us better understand the impact of these sanctions against Russia on the West itself and the far-reaching implications of these harsh measures.
Well, I think the fact that the West has now been ready to impose, very tough sanctions, even though there is a recognition there is going to be significant economic pain, in the EU included, shows how serious they take the threat and the war that's going on in Ukraine from Russia, because it is going to be painful for the West. It's not going to be something that's light, and it will become more painful the more serious the sanctions become that are placed on Russia. But this is something that absolutely needs to be done, because this is not just about Ukraine. This is about the world, the free world, about our democracy, our values. You need to stand up to a geopolitical bully, and this needs to be done now, and it needs to be done hard.
Right. Dr. Curry, let's also talk about the stance taken by Germany through the course of this conflict. There's been a marked shift when it comes to, for example, the Nord Stream project. Now, with Germany ready to send arms as well, what is the larger message that Berlin is sending across?
Well, at least there's just one message now. As the conflict started heating up 3-4 weeks ago, you saw Germany's newly elected cabinet not really on the same page with some of their messaging. The Social Democratic Chancellor Olaf Scholz was saying one thing. The Green Party's Annalena Baerbock, who's also now the foreign minister, was saying another thing. And then you had the defense minister, who's also a social democrat, saying that energy policy and security policy were not connected. And that was very disappointing to many Ukrainians, because you'll have to understand the context that Germany uses the logic that there is some type of debt towards Russia because of what was inflicted on Russia by Nazi Germany in World War II. What's often forgotten is that Ukraine experienced the most human loss per capita of any country, but often these losses are calculated to the Soviet Union rather than looking at the area that is now Ukraine. So Ukrainians felt at the beginning that they were being forgotten and they were going to be left quasi holding the bag. You had been talking about the financial repercussions, or Amanda had the financial repercussions, and that this has to be taken. If we look towards Ukraine, though, it's not only going to be financial repercussions. People are losing life. And I've noticed in the past days that German politicians are trying to reframe this discussion away from, a very driven economic discussion into European solidarity and talking about the importance of democracy and how what is going on in Ukraine cannot be tolerated. I think it was a miscalculation by Putin, because I don't think he expected this to happen, especially in Germany. And for your viewers that haven't been following it as closely, today Germany really did a policy 180. Yesterday was maybe the first foreshadowing of this event, because they finally decided that they would sell or provide Ukraine weapons. And they had been saying they would not supply weapons to any country that was in a conflict, even if they were defensive weapons. That has now shifted yesterday. And today in the German parliament, the Deutsche Bundestag, there was several speeches about how Germany is now completely shifting its defense policy, and it will try to support Ukraine. And it's planning on spending at least 2%, I believe, of its GDP now on defense.
Right. Amanda, before we wrap, I want to also talk about how Beijing has been watching the developments in Ukraine very closely. Given the situation between China and Taiwan, also given that there were reports earlier talking about how China was prepared to soften the blow of West sanctions against Russia, what is your assessment of this?
Well, I think that the West is also watching carefully what China has been doing. I mean, China has been quite, ambiguous in a number of its statements. Of course, there's a big concern here vis-a-vis Taiwan about China's position in the Indo-Pacific region. I mean, from the side of the West, and from, I think, individual experts and whatnot, it would be much better if China could actually, be on the right side of history and could step up and support those that are now fully supporting Ukraine.
WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.